Welcome to the first of 8 webinars over the next 2 weeks in our uncertainty series. I think you can guess why we've called it the uncertainty series, because we really do live in some unprecedented times, not only globally but nationally, and even with regards to sort of the industries within. And we're going to be covering a little bit of that through the next sort of half an hour or so. Just to let you know, we've muted everyone's video, so you can't share your video. So if you're in your pajamas in your bed or you're having a bad hair day, then we won't be able to see you. And then there's a Q&A section. So if you, I don't know, sometimes at the top of a screen or bottom of a screen, if you sort of mirror or your mouse over it, you will see a Q&A, and please feel free to post any Q&A or any questions that you have there. And then at the end of the session, if you don't mind, just hang on for a second to complete a quick survey. I'd really appreciate your feedback so we can improve the way we do things. All right, so that's who I am. I'm Rowan Horoff. I'm the business manager of Munro Forensic Actuaries. I'm also an attorney. I haven't practiced as an attorney for many, many years, but here I am. I've also got a couple of panelists to help me out, my fellow actuaries, making sure that I don't blow this too much and look too deeply into the so-called crystal ball and give you all weird stuff. So they will be helping me if there are any very, very technical questions that you have and that I might not be able to answer. All right. So this is just a little bit of what we're going to cover. I'm just going to look at some of the unprecedented times that we're living in. I've got some interesting graphs and stuff that I enjoy when we're able to take statistics and put them in graphs to make it visual. So I've pulled out a few things that I found interesting over the last couple of weeks regarding from various sites. So we're looking at the RAF industry, which we'll chat about very, very briefly. I think most of you would be aware of that, but just it is unprecedented what's happening in that space at the moment. Look at the whole COVID crisis, look at junk status, what it might mean for our country, what it actually means. Then just look at how we've been sort of as actuaries applying actuarial thinking to our business, not only our products and services, and then looking at some of the lessons that we've learned and that might be helpful to you in your business or in your practice. All right, so RABs and RAF, you would be aware that there are rumors, obviously, that RABs is on the go and they're not on the go. I was at a portfolio committee meeting at Parliament about 2 weeks ago, where there was supposedly going to be this interesting ending of RABs. Got there to find that no one from the Department of Transport had bothered to show up, and so the portfolio committee chairman was pretty angry at that, and there was some more other person there who he then sort of proceeded to give a very stern warning to about the Transport Portfolio Committee arriving in RABs. So that is still on the back burner. The next meeting was to be the 14th of April, but as you now know that we're in lockdown to the 16th of April, so it'll be interesting to see when that meeting picks up. And then just again, with what's happening in the RAF is quite unprecedented. I mean, I've been involved in this, as an expert side for the last 10 years, and the removing of the panel of attorneys is quite unprecedented. And you might be aware of the litigation that's been going on in Pretoria and continues to go on in Pretoria. And there have been letters to and fro between the judge president and the attorneys that launched that action or that motion. And then obviously if you had read the responding affidavit of the CEO or the acting CEO of RAF, if you haven't read it, I'd really encourage you to read it, because he basically sets out the strategy for the road accident fund over the next couple of years. So it's actually very, very interesting reading. This motion that was brought by the panel attorneys has allowed us to actually look behind the veil, so to speak, with regards to the road accident fund. And they are obviously, well, one of the big things that they're trying to do is lessen costs, and so they feel the litigated matters where a couple of months ago, I think Prof. Henny Kloppers from UNISA wrote an article where in the Darebos, which you can go, I think was in December, where he spoke about the road accident fund using litigation as a cash flow tactic, basically trying to spread their cash flow out, so they litigated, and obviously that ran up their costs to the tune of about 10 billion rand a year now. So they now are moving on into a very big settlement drive, within the Gauteng jurisdiction of the courts. They're wanting to settle everything from June to December this year. It'll be very interesting to see how they actually do that with no attorneys are present. And so I think there's a lot of uncertainty as to actually what's going to happen on the ground, at least from our side. And then obviously wanting to use mediation as an option to settlement. And there with the South African Medico Legal Association, which I'll allude to a bit later, sort of involved with the Road Accident Fund. So very, very different, very, very uncertain times with regards to the industry that we're in. Then obviously COVID-19. And so there's this very interesting website called Worldometers or Worldometers, however which way you provide it. And that's just very much just a quick graph showing the total cases, total deaths. So there's no flattening of the curve that's happening there. It's basically just going up and up. And then these are the top 8 countries in the world that are currently battling with the virus, and you can see China's now slipped down to what's it, 6th. Again, you're never too sure. There's lots of allegations that the information that's coming out of China is not necessarily transparent, but there it is. And then you'll see the UK at the bottom there, knowing that Boris Johnson headed off to hospital recently because his symptoms have got a lot worse. So that's the stats of the 6th of April. I mean, if you'd go on to Worldometers now, you'd probably see the stats are a lot higher. What does become quite interesting is if you look at the US. So let me actually just go back there. I mean, if you go back here, you'll see I don't know if you can see my mouse, but I am using it. I mean that there are 367,000 of the 1.3 million cases in the world at the moment. But when you sort of drill down a little bit bigger, you start to, I just did a little bit of maths here, I'm hoping it's correct. I checked it a couple of times, but United States has 26% of the global proportion of cases and 15% of the global deaths. And then you drill down a little bit bigger and you see that actually New York itself has 10% of the global cases and 6% of the deaths. And then within the American context, over a third of the cases are in New York and almost half of the deaths are in New York. So it's quite staggering. And then that's when you realize that New York is sort of like the financial capital of the world. And then you'll see the graph below there, no farm payroll jobs. There are a couple of graphs. These are from, I got on the World Economic Forum. And this is literally as of the end of March. And you can see right at the end of that orange graph that just drops. So basically they've had, since 2016, you can see they've been adding jobs sort of every month. And suddenly there's been this massive turnaround now when they don't have jobs. And there are a couple, and there's some other graphs which I didn't have time to put up, but actually show the American sort of graph growing in terms of creation of jobs. And then you suddenly see just at the beginning of the COVID crisis, it sort of drops off. So unprecedented, at least in the last 4 years within America, and certainly within the Trump administration, who's been pushing this idea that he's growing the economy and he's growing jobs. This doesn't come at a very good time for him. And then this is the whole idea of flattening the curve. You would have heard about this. This is exactly what we're trying to do. And there you can start to see China have basically started to do that as they started with their lockdown. And then we move into South Africa, and you start to see it's sort of starting to happen here from about March the 28th, where it's not flattening yet, but it's hopefully on its way for a downturn, beyond the 6th of April. And then that's what the bar graph looks with regards to daily new cases. So you can, on the right here, from the 6th of March to the 3rd of April, it doesn't mean there's nothing. It's just mean it's so minuscule that it actually doesn't reflect on this graph. Although maybe there may be nothing. So anyway, that's what their graph looks like, the Chinese. And when you look at our graph, we're sort of hopefully going the same way. So this lockdown is doing what it's doing. What is interesting is whether there will be a second wave, and there's some reading around the so-called Spanish flu of 1918. I think there were 2 or 3 waves that happened, and this idea that once you break the lockdown, if those who are vulnerable don't stay at home or stay isolated or socially distance themselves, they can really just start the pattern again, and so the graph will continue going. So that's actually the challenge that the government faces from the 16th of April onwards: is do they open up the country again, and how do they open up? Because there's real evidence for them just opening up normal. You'll start with the same 10, for example, that started in KZN, that came from Italy. You're obviously going to have more than 10 people who are out in the public space who are asymptomatic but are contagious. And do you have a second wave? And that's where this big debate's now going to start happening, and we're going to start seeing it as we get closer to lockdown. Does the government avert a health crisis? And what I mean by avert a health crisis, and clamp this thing down entirely, but basically possibly tank the economy, or do they open it up so that people can go back to work and so that the economy can start to resuscitate, but then you threaten mass contagion? And so they really are having to sort of, they're in between the devil and the deep blue sea, as the phrase goes, to what they're going to have to do next. And then just these are, again, just showing how the curves are working. And you'll see that obviously China and South Korea have managed to start to flatten the curve. There's almost the beginning of a second wave for China. And there South Korea flattening the curve. There you can see South Africa also flattening the curve. And I've put Algeria in because Algeria has the second most cases in Africa. But you can literally see there's Italy and the United Kingdom. And then here's the United States, top of the log, as they like to be, but for all the wrong reasons this time. And I just found this very interesting quote from the Undersecretary of Health, where she said, Italy looked at the example of China not as a practical warning, but as a science fiction movie that had nothing to do with us. And when the virus exploded, Europe looked at us the same way we looked at China. And I think that's where our government's done really, really well. They haven't looked at it as a science fiction movie. They've understood very, very quickly the catastrophic implications it can have for South Africa if we don't do something very, very quickly. All right, junk status. One thing I sort of found out as I was reading up is this is actually the first time in a long time that all three rating agencies have had us at junk status. So if you look here, you'll see the different lines, and you'll see the green line is Moody's. And so even from 1994, and I think pre-1994, they had us at investment grade, and you can see how it's moved over time until recently now they've dropped us. But basically all three agencies had us at investment grade around about 2001. And then you can see how things increased, and then around about the Zuma years, things started to go south. And now we found ourselves in junk status. And it says the downgrade is justified because the government hasn't shown a clear path towards stabilizing its debt, as well as the expected impact of the COVID-19 shock on public finances and economic growth. So that's just a double whammy. I think we were always going to be downgraded, like irrespective of COVID, but now that's like really sealed the deal as far as Moody's is concerned. Just important to note that credit rating agencies don't measure the health of the local economy. What they're really doing is assessing the government's ability to pay back its debt. How likely are they to pay their debt? And some of the factors that affect the sovereign credit rating are things like political stability, as I said, the level of national debt, what is the size of the debt interest payments relative to the percentage of GDP? Is the economy growing? Those are the sort of things that it measures. And obviously, with our unreliable electricity supply, with our weak business environment, with low levels of investment in the country, cost of labor is really expensive. Our policy landscape is not conducive to good business. I think this is basically what's led us down this road to where we're now seen as junk. So what are some of the implications? Well, the depreciation of the rand, that's a graph that I find quite interesting. I'm hoping you can see it. It goes all the way back to 1990, but basically we've pierced 19 rand to the dollar for the first time in our history, as of I think about the 3rd or 4th of April. So what happens is when the rand depreciation obviously becomes more expensive to import stuff. So in this case, obviously one of the big imports is oil, and then the oil prices are a little bit flat at the moment because Russia and I think the guys in the Middle East are having a bit of a barney. But generally speaking, our oil will become more expensive. And once your imports become more expensive, your inflation starts to increase. And as your inflation starts to increase, the South African Reserve Bank starts to step in with increasing repo rates, and those repo rates have an impact on interest rates, and those are the interest rates that we pay on our mortgage bond and car payments. So there's a possibility that our inflation over the next couple of, well, however long, will increase with possibly increase in repo rates, interest rates, and stuff. So that's one of the big impacts of going to junk status. Another one is the cost of borrowing. So if a country is more likely to default, lenders will charge a higher interest rate to compensate for the greater risk. Okay, so that's what they're saying is we're at risk of defaulting. And so then we start to have this thing called the funding gap. So we can't, for social initiatives like social welfare grants and infrastructure, building roads and, especially service delivery and formal settlements, there's a funding gap. So how does the government, they have to increase their revenue? How do they do that? They either increase taxes and or they borrow more. And obviously if they borrow more, they're borrowing at a higher interest rate because there's more risk involved with, foreign lenders lending us money. And then this is the ultimate sort of whammy, is that South Africa loses its place in the World Government Bond Index at the end of April. So they reckon there's going to be about 88 billion rand that'll be pulled out of the economy. Basically what it means is because we're not on the World Government Bond Index, people, they obviously can buy bonds if they want, but there's sort of a recommendation that they don't, or they're not allowed at least to be on that index. All right, so here looking at how we've sort of apply our actuarial thinking to our business, and there are three things that I want to sort of cover here. And then the first one is we have a big sort of emphasis on extraordinary action. I think our whole business has been built around this idea that if you don't act, and you don't act, as that quote from Tony Robbins says, if you don't act massively and determinedly, then you're not going to succeed. Really, you're not going to get to where you want to go. And we've done this in three areas. One is focus on the customer, and in this, when I'm looking at these next three areas, I'm sort of relying on the language of Jeff Bezos of Amazon, who's sort of describes quite well what we've been trying to do. So focus on the customer. He talks about this idea that the customers are always beautifully and wonderfully dissatisfied, and if you focus on always trying to make them happier, it's hard to go wrong. And so one of the things we've tried to do over the years is recognize our place in this litigation chain, and that often there are a whole bunch of experts. Well, all the time there are experts that precede the work that we do. And we realized that the name of the game was fast turnaround time. So I can remember when we started 10 years ago that the services that were being provided nationally was sort of 2 to 3 weeks in waiting. And we thought, no, we realized that attorneys needed their work a lot faster. And so we moved to a sort of a fast turnaround time of sort of 2 days. And that, I think, really was a game changer for the growth of our business, and a game changer for the industry as well. I think most actuarial companies now easily give their reports within 2 days. The second thing that we look at is managing the future outcome and not the process. So one of the interesting things is that you can take you can take a task and make it a process, and you actually become more interested in ticking the box ticking boxes for a list of steps rather than actually keeping an eye on the outcome. And what happens then is that people go, well, when they end up with the wrong result, they say, "But I followed the process," and that's the reason that, well, not that that's the reason, but I followed the process, so therefore the outcome should be self-evident. But actually, it's not that, and so we have to recognize that process is an enabler, and that sometimes you can get to the outcome by not necessarily following all the steps. And so we've tried to sort of empower our people to say, focus on the outcome, get to the outcome, and don't be stuck in the process, which sometimes doesn't get you to the desired outcome that you wish. And then be alert and quickly adopt to trends. So one of the questions we started asking ourselves quite a few years ago is, what does the future of work look like? And one of the dreams we had was this ability to be able to actually run the business from an iPad sitting on a beach or in a mountain. And we started to very, very specifically look at how technology could be an enabler for that. And in the old days, you remember that that the only way you could do sort of phone calls was via the old telecom copper line coming into your building, and then obviously you had a switchboard, and then different wires would have to go through the building to go to the other phones at other desks, and so phone calls could be put through. And then when ADSL came into buildings and stuff, you were able to get like a 20 meg line. We started experimenting with voice over internet protocols, which allowed us basically to have a switchboard that would basically be plugged into the ADSL line, but then you could put through calls through wireless modems. So you wouldn't necessarily have to, and that certainly made things a little bit more flexible. You could actually now, if you had to move office, you could quickly move office. You wouldn't necessarily have to get Telcom in to change everything, but just maybe one or two lines. And then straightly with fiber, when that sort of came on board, sort of like a year and a half, 2 years ago, we were really ready to go fully remote, and we started experimenting with people working from remote locations. And we basically got hold of, and I'll show you quickly the app. We then basically got an app. I'm hoping you can all see that. But basically, this app is a voice over internet app. So my office basically, you guys can make a call to our switchboard at 0215514609, and the switchboard is actually sitting in C Point at the moment. And our client relations consultant can pick up the phone, and you can say you want to speak to Rowan, and they'll say fantastic, and then they'll use my extension there, 710, and it'll be put straight through to me. So I've actually taken calls in my car before over Bluetooth, and the call comes through. And so now, actually, what's the irony is that the desire to work remotely is actually really sort of saved our business during this period of lockdown. So the Monday before the lockdown, we made a decision that everyone must go home and work, and by Tuesday morning, everyone was at home working. So this is the idea of we were looking at the future of work, and we've really worked hard at trying to adopt to the trends that are happening there. Okay, so some lessons we've learned. So with respect to you're only as strong as your weakest link. Interestingly, about the United States being the sort of the epicenter of this pandemic, one of the reasons is they weakened the agencies that are actually responsible for containing an outbreak. So in 2018, the Trump administration began weakening these agencies because they basically thought, because I think it was what Obama had set up, and he didn't like the expensive bureaucracy that Obama had set up. And so now they've disbanded something called the National Security Council's Pandemic Response Team, and the Global Health Security and Biodefense Unit have been disbanded. And so they actually don't have an infrastructure to be able to deal with a pandemic like this. In South Africa, our weakest link is our apartheid spatial planning and the government neglect of essential services in informal settlements. And so we have this real potential that if COVID-19 gets into the informal settlements where people are living, 6 people in a shack with no windows, are unable to practice social distancing, you cannot expect them to stay isolated. Our weakest link is our past and our government's, sort of current corruption. And in a business context, there are obviously lots of weakest links, but they are the things that are going to sink you. Either the people that you hire, the technology that you adopt, or the lack of technology will slow your business down. Whether you're able to collect revenue, as long as the money's not in your bank, it's in somebody else's bank, you're earning interest. And then when you get it, depending on how long, the value of that money has been eaten away by inflation. So is your revenue collection strategy your weakest link? Do you have too much debt? Those are all sort of things that, as a business, you have to look into and go, okay, so what are the things that are slowing us down? The second thing is communication is key, and as actuaries, we really rely on clear communication. And if if the communication is not clear, it can lead to significant delays in actually getting a report done, or it can lead to a situation where the actuary is forced to make certain assumptions, and those assumptions will have a material impact on the outcome or the loss or the claim. And that's part of the reason why we set up these webinars. So if we get an instructor, and that's part of what we're trying to do, is to take the uncertainty out of the information and the communication that is given to our actuaries for them to be able to do the work that they need to do for you. And the second thing that we've realized regarding communication is, well, especially when you are in isolation, is you take the physical cues for granted, right? So you can see someone at their desk, you can hear them walking past. If you're looking for them, you can go for a walk in the building, you can find them. But once you're in lockdown, or once you're working remotely in this new world of work, everything changes, and you don't have those visible cues anymore with people. So we've had to sort of put protocols in place, and we're learning all the time. What are the protocols that need to be put in place to make sure that we can still be productive and we can still be connected. So in our business at the moment, all our teams have daily check-ins. What are their goals for the day? What are the challenges for the day? And some of the teams even have check-ins at the end of the day, like what are some of the obstacles they're confronted? Where do they need support, and so on. Another important part is emotional temperature. I think you take for granted that when you are in an office and you're working together, there is an emotional bonding and a teamwork that takes place. But once you go remote, then people just, by default, you sort of disconnect. And so it's very, very important that you're checking in with your team, how you're doing emotionally, how you're feeling, et cetera, et cetera. And then technology. So we're using Microsoft Teams, not a punt for Microsoft Teams, but really just, it's a very, very good tool, because it allows you not only to communicate exactly the same way we are on Zoom at the moment, but you're able to set up groups with teams with different people in those teams around certain topics. And you're able to have conversations along certain threads. You're able to load files, and really it's moving us away from email, because email, if you think about it, is just a list which has got no categorization. I know you can categorize Outlook a little bit, but it's got no categorization, and you can become a slave to your email. So you can spend like hours and hours going through email without any sort of intentional work being done on a particular project or on a particular topic. Whereas in Microsoft Teams, people can post stuff there, and then you can decide when you want to go and look at what's happening in a particular team, and then you can deal with everything that has been said or loaded with respect to that particular topic. And then the next lesson, or the last lesson I want to talk about a little bit is future proofing. Future proofing your business, and one of the things we're trying to do is diversifying our business. So we've set up a little lab. We call it the Zero Lab. We've got a whole bunch of projects running through that lab, and they're going through a particular process, which basically moves everything from an idea right through to bringing it to scale. And one of the things we've started dealing with is something called the earnings assistant, and that's going to come up in one of our webinars. I think the role of the actuary when instructions are vague, and this is what actually has come out of the Zero Lab, where we are trying to help industrial psychologists properly plot their earnings progression. So it achieves two things. One is that they achieve the earnings progression that their story tells them they want to achieve, or not necessarily the story that they want to achieve, but the story of the claimant. And that secondly, they have the right information. We spoke about earlier about communication is key. So sometimes an industrial psychologist has a very, very clear idea in their mind as to the career of this claimant. But then when they start to put the numbers down, those numbers tell us something else. So this earnings assistant is something we're rolling out. I think the national rollout's probably near the end of May sometime, but that's going to be dealt with in one of our other seminars. So I really encourage you to do that. Another thing that is important regarding regarding diversifying is look at what's in your hand. Like what have you already got in terms of skills, in terms of people, in terms of technology, that you can start to look at other opportunities. And part of that is also networking. So I mentioned South African Medico Legal Association. I'm on the board of directors there, and it's just a great place to be, where you're connecting with different professionals, and you're hearing different ideas about what they're doing, but you're also then getting involved at the heart of the industry and trying to make things a lot better. So those are two things that we're attempting there as well. Become lifelong learners. Stephen Covey, in his book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, talks about it's sharpening the saw, and that you'll see in the bottom right hand corner there. This is the World Economic Forum reckons that by 2022, everyone will need an extra 101 days of learning. So if you want to future-proof your business, becoming a lifelong learner is critical. And then never let I think the word is never let a good crisis go to waste. So here's some interesting startups that were founded during the 2008 recession, and their current values. And I mean, I think most of us will know most of those. And obviously they're big companies, and sometimes we look at them and say, yeah, that's in America and it's tech-based companies. But it's this idea that it's the mindset that we take, right? So we can either go, well, it's a crisis, I can't do anything. Well, actually, there's a crisis. A lot of things actually come out of a crisis. New needs arise. There are new problems to solve. And what can you do in the midst of a crisis? And so I just want to finish off with this quote. A guy called Ken Lin, who founded a personal finance company called Credit Karma. It's in the middle of the 2008 recession, valued at $4 billion. And I think I really like what he says here, and I think it really sets the thinking up for this future proofing. And I'll just read it. As the recession took hold, the economy was tough, funding was scarce, and there was widespread distrust from consumers. I learned in those early days to focus on the long term. Building and scaling an impactful business requires a drive beyond making money. And these are the key words for me. Having the passion to deliver on your company's purpose will fuel you during trying times. So it's really just in these times of crisis, like, why did you build the business in the first place? What's its purpose? What problem are you trying to solve? And discover the passion that you have for that business. And I think that's what a lot of these people were doing. Is that's what gets you through these times of crisis. All right, so that's the ball game. I'm hoping that's been useful to you on some level. I don't have any questions, unfortunately. Now I'm struggling to get to, yeah. So if there are any questions, I don't see any questions, but feel free to, if you want to now quickly pop up a question. I'll wait for a minute or two, but if you do decide to leave in the meantime, thanks very much. And why don't you just complete the survey that is finished. And yeah, there is a question here. Will the recording of this be available to us? Yes, it will be made available. We've got your details, and so we'll send the details of this to you as to where it's going to appear. We have a YouTube channel called Munro TV, but because I'm not the tech guy in the business, I'm not too sure if that's exactly where it's going to load it up. But Munro TV is a good place to go if you want to also just look at some other interesting videos. Please feel free to sign up to the other webinars. I really think you'll find a lot of value in them. The responding affidavit, yes, the responding affidavit from the RAF. I can forward that. So I've got your details, Gerard, and I'll get those sent. I'll get that sent to you. I think if we've got, I'm hoping we've got everybody's email address. So I think we can actually. I'll send that that responding affidavit to everybody we have on who signed up for the webinar. Okay, that looks like it. I just want to sort of get around the tech here and make sure I haven't missed anybody or anything. Yeah, so I've got all the questions. All right, that looks like it's it. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you taking the time. Good luck for the rest of the lockdown. Hopefully we can all be set free on Thursday to go back to our businesses. Thank you very much.